The history of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Introduction. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989 was not just a turning point for Germany, it was a profound moment in world history. It signaled the collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe, the end of the Cold War, and the beginning of a new era in global politics. For nearly 3 decades, the wall had symbolized the Iron Curtain that divided East from West, communism from capitalism, and oppression from freedom. Its unexpected and peaceful toppling reflected not only the resilience and courage of the East German people, but also broader geopolitical shifts occurring in the Soviet Union and across the Eastern Bloc. To fully appreciate the significance of the Berlin Wall's fall, one must examine the complex historical context that led to its construction, its daily impact on German citizens, and the mounting pressures that culminated in its ultimate collapse. Post-war Europe and the origins of the Berlin Wall division of Germany. After the end of World War II in 1945, the Allied powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, divided both Germany and its capital, Berlin, into 4 occupation zones. Initially, this arrangement was meant to be temporary. However, ideological tensions quickly escalated between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, laying the foundation for the Cold War. In 1949, the zones under Western control became the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, a democratic and capitalist nation. In contrast, the Soviet-controlled zone became the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, a communist state under heavy Soviet influence. Berlin, situated entirely within East Germany, was also split into East and West, with West Berlin becoming an isolated Western enclave. The East German Exodus. The contrast between the two Germanys was stark. While West Germany experienced rapid economic recovery thanks to the Marshall Plan and democratic institutions, East Germany remained repressive, economically stagnant, and tightly controlled by the Socialist Unity Party, SED. As a result, millions of East Germans began fleeing to the West, primarily through Berlin. Between 1949 and 1961, over 2.5 million people defected, creating a brain drain that threatened the very survival of the East German state. The Berlin Wall, construction and consolidation. Building the wall. To stop the mass exodus, East German authorities, with Soviet approval, took drastic action. In the early hours of August 13, 1961, East German troops and workers began sealing off West Berlin with barbed wire and roadblocks. Over the following weeks, this temporary barrier was replaced by a formidable concrete wall fortified with guard towers, anti-vehicle trenches, floodlights, and a deadly death strip. The official narrative claimed that the wall was erected to prevent Western aggression, but in reality it was a desperate move to imprison East Germans and preserve the regime's stability. The Berlin Wall ultimately stretched 155 kilometers, 96 miles, and included over 300 watchtowers, creating one of the most fortified borders in human history. Life under the wall. For the residents of Berlin, especially those in East Germany, the wall had a profound impact on daily life. Families were torn apart overnight, friends separated, and communities divided. The East German government implemented strict surveillance, heavily policed borders, and harsh penalties for attempted escapes. Nonetheless, many tried to flee. Some succeeded by tunneling under the wall, flying homemade aircraft, or hiding in secret compartments in vehicles. Others were not so lucky. Over 100 people are believed to have died attempting to cross the wall, either shot by guards or killed by mines and traps. Each death served as a chilling reminder of the brutality of the regime and the lengths people would go to for freedom. The Cold War context superpower rivalry. The Berlin Wall quickly became a symbol of the broader East-West divide. It represented the physical manifestation of the ideological struggle between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its satellite states. American presidents, including John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, famously visited the wall, delivering rousing speeches that emphasized the Western commitment to freedom and the injustice of division. Kennedy's 1963 speech in Berlin, where he declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner," was a powerful message of solidarity. Reagan's 1987 speech, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," served as a direct challenge to the Soviet leadership and further inspired those yearning for change. Soviet influence and reform. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was facing severe internal problems. Under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, the USSR introduced a series of reforms known as perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, openness. These reforms aimed to revitalize the Soviet economy and reduce corruption, but inadvertently loosened Moscow's grip on Eastern Europe. Gorbachev made it clear that the Soviet Union would no longer use military force to prop up communist regimes in the region, a stark departure from past interventions in Hungary, 1956, and Czechoslovakia, 1968. This new doctrine gave Eastern Bloc nations more autonomy and emboldened reform movements, seeds of change, East Germany in the 1980s, rising discontent. By the late 1980s, East Germany was plagued by economic stagnation, political rigidity, and growing unrest. Citizens were disillusioned with the lack of freedom, limited consumer goods, and the constant surveillance of the Stasi, the secret police. Churches became a sanctuary for dissenters, and grassroots organizations began pushing for reform. The most notable expressions of dissent were the Monday demonstrations in Leipzig, which began in September 1989. What started with a few hundred protesters demanding democratic reforms quickly grew into a mass movement of tens of thousands. The government initially responded with threats and intimidation, but ultimately refrained from violent crackdowns, partly out of fear of international backlash and internal collapse. Escaping through neighboring countries with Hungary's decision in May 1989 to dismantle its border fence with Austria, a new escape route opened up. Thousands of East Germans traveled to Hungary to cross into Western Europe. Others sought refuge in West German embassies in Prague and Warsaw. The East German regime, unable to stop the outflow, found its authority rapidly eroding. The collapse of the regime political upheaval. The pressure on the East German government became untenable. In October 1989, longtime leader Erich Honecker was forced to resign and replaced by Egon Krenz, who promised reform but failed to restore public trust. Massive protests continued across East Germany, with over 500,000 people demonstrating in Berlin on November 4th. Krenz and the SED leadership realized that some form of liberalization was inevitable. In an effort to appease the public, they began drafting new travel regulations. However, poor communication and bureaucratic mishandling would prove fatal for the regime. November 9th, 1989. The night the wall fell. On the evening of November 9th, 1989, East German government spokesman Günter Schabowski held a press conference to announce new travel policies. When asked when the changes would take effect, he hesitantly replied, "As far as I know, immediately, without delay." Within hours, thousands of East Berliners gathered at border checkpoints, demanding passage to the west. Unprepared and without clear orders, the overwhelmed border guards eventually opened the gates. Crowds surged through, greeted with cheers and celebration from West Berliners. People climbed atop the wall, danced, and began chipping away at it with hammers and chisels. No shots were fired, no violence occurred. The Berlin Wall, once the most iconic symbol of Cold War division, had effectively ceased to exist. Global reactions and the aftermath. A world-transformed news of the wall's collapse spread rapidly across the globe. World leaders hailed the event as a victory for freedom and democracy. In the days and weeks that followed, Berlin became the center of global attention. The symbolism of the moment could not be overstated. It marked the end of an era, the final unraveling of a divided Europe. Within months, communist regimes across Eastern Europe fell like dominoes. Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, Romania's bloody overthrow of Nicolae Ceausescu, and the peaceful transitions in Poland and Hungary all followed in rapid succession. The Soviet Union, too, would collapse within 2 years, ending decades of Cold War rivalry. German reunification. The fall of the Berlin Wall set the stage for the reunification of Germany after intense negotiations involving the Allied powers, both German states and European leaders. The treaty on the final settlement with respect to Germany was signed. On October 3, 1990, Germany was officially reunified, and Berlin reclaimed its status as the capital of a united nation. Though the reunification process was not without challenges, economic disparities, social integration, and political restructuring, it marked a historic success for diplomacy and democracy. Legacy of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of freedom. Today, the Berlin Wall remains a powerful symbol of the resilience of the human spirit and the universal desire for freedom. Sections of the wall have been preserved as memorials and museums. The East Side Gallery, where artists from around the world painted murals on a surviving stretch of the wall, stands as a vibrant tribute to peace and unity. Educational programs, documentaries, and public commemorations ensure that new generations understand the history and lessons of the Berlin Wall. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of political oppression, the costs of division, and the power of collective action to enact change. Contemporary relevance. In an age where new walls, both literal and metaphorical, are being proposed or erected, the history of the Berlin Wall continues to resonate. It challenges societies to confront the causes of division and to prioritize dialogue, empathy, and inclusion over isolation and fear. Global impact. Post-1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, was not just a German or European event, it had sweeping global consequences. The event became a catalyst for the end of the Cold War, reshaped the international order, triggered economic and political reforms worldwide, and redefined global relations in the decades that followed. Below are the most significant global impacts. 1. End of the Cold War collapse of the Eastern Bloc. The wall's fall symbolized the unraveling of the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc. Within a year, communist regimes in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and East Germany either reformed or collapsed under popular pressure. Dissolution of the Soviet Union. The loss of influence over Eastern Europe severely weakened the Soviet Union. By December 1991, the USSR dissolved, ending over 70 years of communist rule and the global bipolar power structure. 2. Reunification of Germany and European integration. German reunification, 1990. East and West Germany formally reunified on October 3, 1990. This not only ended 4 decades of division, but also made Germany the largest and most economically powerful nation in Europe. European Union expansion. The fall of communist regimes allowed many Central and Eastern European countries to pursue EU membership. Former Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and the Baltic states joined the EU between 2004 and 2007, strengthening European unity and integration. NATO enlargement. NATO expanded eastward, incorporating many former Warsaw Pact nations. This altered the strategic balance in Europe and reshaped military alliances. 3. Shift from bipolar to unipolar world order. U.S. as sole superpower. With the Soviet Union gone, the United States emerged as the world's unchallenged superpower. This marked the beginning of a unipolar moment, where U.S. economic and military influence dominated global affairs. Globalization. Surge. The end of ideological division accelerated economic globalization. Former communist nations opened up to free markets, joined international trade systems, and sought integration into the global economy. 4. Rise of democracy and market economies. Democratic transitions. Many countries in Eastern Europe transitioned from one-party authoritarian systems to multi-party democracies with free elections and new constitutions. Market liberalization. Former socialist economies shifted toward capitalist systems, introducing privatization, deregulation, and foreign investment. The transformation was often painful, involving inflation, unemployment, and inequality, but laid the foundation for future growth. Global democratic momentum. The success of Eastern European revolutions inspired democratic movements in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia during the 1990s. 5. New security challenges and regional conflicts. Yugoslav Wars, 1991-2001, the collapse of communism and the weakening of Soviet influence led to ethnic and nationalist tensions erupting in Yugoslavia. The result was a series of brutal wars, including genocide in Bosnia and Kosovo, that reshaped the Balkan region. Nuclear proliferation risks. The breakup of the Soviet Union left nuclear weapons in countries like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. Diplomatic efforts led to their disarmament, but fears of nuclear proliferation increased. Terrorism and new threats. With Cold War rivalry gone, new asymmetric threats emerged, most notably terrorism as seen in the 9/11 attacks, which led to U.S.-led interventions in the Middle East. 6. Rebirth of national identities and ethnic tensions. Nationalism re-emerged. The suppression of ethnic and national identities under communism gave way to nationalist revivals. This was peaceful in some places, but violent in others, such as the Caucasus, Balkans, and parts of Central Asia. Creation of new states. Several new countries emerged from the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. The map of Europe and Central Asia changed dramatically, adding over 20 new sovereign states to the global order. 7. Transformation of the global economy, rise of emerging markets. Formerly closed-off economies became emerging markets. Countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and the Baltic states began rapid economic growth, transforming into modern European economies. China's strategic shift. Although China had started its economic reforms in 1978, the fall of the Berlin Wall further reinforced its leadership's belief in economic liberalization without political reform. China observed the collapse of communist regimes and doubled down on authoritarian capitalism. Global supply chains. With new countries entering the global market, labor and production began shifting to Eastern Europe and Asia, fueling the creation of complex international supply chains. 8. Cultural and psychological impact. End of ideological division. The binary worldview of capitalism versus communism dissolved. This altered international relations, academic thought, and political theory. Symbol of peaceful revolution. The peaceful fall of the Berlin Wall became a global symbol of what civic resistance and people power could achieve without violence. Digital and information exchange. The 1990s saw the explosion of the internet and satellite communication, fueled in part by former closed societies opening to outside ideas and technologies. 9. Human rights and global civil society. Growth of NGOs. With the decline of state control, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and civil society groups proliferated in former communist countries, promoting human rights, education, and democratic governance. Universal Human Rights Agenda. International organizations focused on protecting civil liberties, labor rights, and minority protections in transition countries. Justice and memory. Truth and reconciliation efforts began in many post-communist countries, including the lustration process, removal of former communist officials, and opening of secret police files, like those of the Stasi in East Germany. 10. Global political realignment's decline of non-aligned movement. With the Cold War over, many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America that had once aligned with neither bloc began redefining their foreign policies and pursuing new alliances. New regional powers, countries like India, China, Brazil, and South Africa, gained prominence in a multipolar world as economic liberalization took hold globally. European security architecture redefined. Institutions like the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and the European Union took on more prominent roles in conflict prevention, border monitoring, and human rights enforcement. The collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989 triggered significant economic shifts not only in Germany and Eastern Europe, but also globally. These shifts were driven by the transition from centrally planned economies to market-based systems, the opening of previously closed markets, and the broader realignment of global trade and investment. Here's a detailed breakdown of the key economic shifts.
Please like, share, and subscribe for more videos.